Big History. Big History Stories. Hello, and you're watching Big History Stories.
In a moment, we're going to tell you some really good stories, all about things that happened a long, long time ago. Perhaps you know some of them already.
Well as the stories, there are lots of other things in our programme. We'll be going for a ride on some special boats, climbing right to the top of a very old building, a castle, hearing about some famous people, and meeting some children who went on an adventure into the past.
Woof, woof. And you'll be meeting me, Brodsworth. I'm a fly, I'm a flea that's me. I'm a flea, that's me.
Later, Brodsworth. You're in the programme later. Now then, get ready, hold tight, and off we go with our big history stories.
Do you like eating cakes? Hey, I do, especially chocolate cake. Oh, that's my favourite. Well, this is a story all about a king called King Alfred and some cakes.
King Alfred and the Cakes.
King Alfred lived so long ago that there were hardly any houses or buildings left from the time when he was alive. King Alfred was one of the first kings of England. He made new laws to help people, and everybody looked up to him. And because he was king, no one was ever rude to him or ever answered back. Alfred was a king at a time when the Vikings came to England in big boats from countries like Denmark and Sweden and tried to live here themselves. Some Vikings came and stole as many valuable things as they could from rich houses and churches. King Alfred had a very hard time dealing with these Vikings, and he hated it when the messengers ran into him saying, "The Vikings are here again!" One day, when the messengers had come in yet again to tell King Alfred that a very big group of Vikings had just landed, King Alfred decided that he just about had enough of this, and he needed to get away and think about what to do with these Vikings. So off he went on his own, walking far away from the Vikings and his troubles. He walked and walked until he came to a village a long way away from anywhere. When the villagers saw their king walking through the village, all the women curtsied and all the men bowed. After all, he was King Alfred. But when he got to the last house in the village, he was very, very tired. He asked the old woman who lived in the last house if he could sit down. The old woman didn't recognise him and didn't know he was King Alfred. She just thought he was another man walking about doing nothing and looking for a nice warm fire to sit down and be lazy by. The old woman was cross because, unlike the man, she had lots to do. She had to milk the cow, look after the fields, spin some wool and bake some cakes for her tea. "Yes," she said, "you can sit by my nice warm fire if you like, but you can jolly well make yourself useful by watching my cakes and seeing that they don't burn. They're cooking beside the fire. Yep, you make sure that they don't burn while I go out and feed the pig." "Whee!" said the pig. "Be quiet," said the old lady. Anyway, now because he was king and had lots of servants to look after him, Alfred never ever baked a cake or cooked a meal in his entire life. But he agreed to watch the cakes while the old lady went out to feed the pig. Soon he forgot about the cakes cooking by the fire and began to think about the Vikings instead. "I suppose I could get an army and fight them," he thought to himself. "But then, what if they beat us and take away all our land? Oh dear, I don't know. Well, what if I paid them to stay away? Or maybe I could tell them that they can keep the houses and land that they've already stolen as long as they don't take any more." Round and round the thoughts went in his head. Hotter and hotter the cakes beside the fire got. And just then, King Alfred smelt a funny smell. Sniff, sniff, sniff. What's that smell? Oh no! It's the cakes, they're burning! What am I going to do? Just at that moment, the old woman came back from feeding the pigs. She was tired and hungry, and all she was really looking forward to was eating one of her freshly made cakes. But when she got near the house, she too sniffed the burning smell and realised that Alfred had let her cakes go up in smoke. As soon as she got in through the door, she picked up a broom and began to beat King Alfred all around the room. "Why, you good-for-nothing, useless man! Can't you be left alone for 2 minutes to look after my cake?" she shouted. But, you don't know who I am," spluttered Alfred. "Oh, yes, I know who you are, all right. I know you're just another useless whack, idle whack, windbag whack. But who can't kingdoms, what about my cakes? What am I going to have for my tea? And you know, that was the only time that anyone had ever dared to chase King Alfred with a broom. Pretty soon, the woman found out he really was king. Just imagine that, chasing the King of England around with a broom and whacking him. But Alfred didn't punish her, no, because he believed in doing the right thing and in being fair. Besides, as he said himself, it's true, it was my fault, and I was a silly, useless man to just sit there and let her cakes burn. Good story, that, isn't it? Oh, by the way, do you know which king is purple and burns cakes? King Alfred the Grape! Get it? King Alfred the Grape!
You may be a king, but when it's your turn, don't let the cakes burn. Oh, when it's your turn, don't let the cakes burn.
Most of us don't bake our cakes over a fire any longer. We've got gas and electric cookers and microwave ovens to bake our cakes, do our cooking. People who do cooking as their job are called chefs. Chefs wear special clothes and cook on very big cookers. But in the past, before electricity and gas, chefs had to build a real fire if they wanted to cook a meal. And they didn't have any fridges or freezers to keep food fresh.
It is nice, but it's not too salt, is it?
Here's some people wearing clothes like people wore a long time ago. They're also trying out being chefs who cooked with a real fire.
You might get some food from to get on with it.
Can you see what they're cooking? Is that a kind of vegetable stew? That looks like a sort of curranty bread. And are those the kind of cakes Alfred was supposed to be watching when he let them burn? Wonder what it all tastes like.
They're really good.
Imagine having to keep a fire going all day so that you can have hot water and cook meals. Looks like a lot of hard work to me.
Do you know anyone whose name is Mossycoat? No, I didn't think you would. Well, this story is about a girl who really was called Mossycoat. Now, she lived in the forest, but why did she have such a strange name? Well, let's find out.
Mossycoat. Once upon a time, a girl called Mossycoat lived with her mother in the forest. She was called Mossycoat because her mother had made her a magic coat of mosses collected from the trees. Anyone who touched the cloak fell asleep until morning. One day, Mossycoat's mother said,
"It's time you went out into the big wide world beyond the forest. I will give you a dress made of all the colours of the rainbow and shoes made of crystal to go with it. Take them with you, but don't wear the dress and the shoes until you really need them."
So Mossycoat said goodbye and went into the big wide world. She walked all day until she came to a castle and knocked on the door. "Please, can I have some food and somewhere to sleep?" she asked.
"Only if you work for it," wheezed the big red-faced cook who opened the door. "You can sweep the kitchen for now, and tomorrow you must get up early, make the beds, polish the chests, and scrub the floors."
Mossycoat needed somewhere to live, so she did everything the cook asked. But still there was more work to do, because that night there was to be a ball, with music, dancing and feasting for the king and queen and prince. All the servants were allowed in the gallery to watch the dancing, except Mossycoat.
"You stay here and keep the fire going," croaked the red-faced cook. "And mend my boots," grunted the grumpy old gardener. "And wash the dishes," piped the spotty kitchen maid.
"But I really want to see the king and queen," whispered Mossycoat to herself. And at that moment a little idea popped into her head, and the idea grew and grew until at last she said, "I will go to the ball." And this is how she did it. First she touched the red-faced cook with her magic mossy coat, the coat that made everybody who touched it go to sleep. Suddenly the cook, who was just about to give Mossycoat even more work, yawned.
"Fetch some more wood. I want to see that fire burning bigger than ever. And with that, the red-faced cook toppled over and fell fast asleep beside the fire.
Then the cloak touched the grumpy old gardener.
"You make sure you mend my boots, or I'll... and don't break any dishes,"
sighed the spotty kitchen maid as Mossycoat whisked the cloak over her. Next, when they were all fast asleep, Mossycoat put on the rainbow dress of many colours that her mother had told her to wear only when she needed it, slipped on her crystal shoes and crept off up the grand staircase to the ball. Soon the prince who was dancing spotted her and asked his servants who she was. No one knew.
"I don't care who she is. To me she is the most beautiful person in the whole room, and I shall ask her to dance," said the prince.
So Mossycoat and the prince danced and danced until morning was peeping in at the windows. "Oh, I must go," stammered Mossycoat, suddenly remembering that the sleeping magic of her coat only lasted until morning, and that soon the red-faced cook, the grumpy gardener and the spotty kitchen maid would wake up and find that Mossycoat was nowhere to be seen. Then there would be trouble. Mossycoat rushed out of the hall, and as she ran she stumbled, and one of her crystal slippers came off, which she didn't dare stop to pick it up, and raced into the kitchen just in time.
"Oh, that fire's still burning, I hope," grumbled the red-faced cook, rubbing her eyes as she woke up. "My boots are mended, are they?" mumbled the grumpy old gardener. "Dishes all done?" squeaked the spotty kitchen maid.
Meanwhile the prince had found the slipper. "I will try it on the foot of every woman in the land until I find the one it fits," he vowed. So he went around the whole country, but the slipper wouldn't fit anyone, young or old. In time he came back to the castle and went into all the rooms one by one, asking his servants the same question in every room.
"Are there no more ladies here?" In every room the servants shook their head and muttered, "No, there are no more ladies here."
Then, in the kitchen, the prince spotted Mossycoat sitting quietly on her own by the fire.
"Here's someone who hasn't tried on the crystal slipper," he said. "Allow me." He knelt by Mossycoat and slipped the tiny crystal slipper onto her foot. "Silly boy, he's wasting his time," groaned the red-faced cook. "Daft idea," bumbled the grumpy gardener. "No chance, she's got no chance," whined the spotty kitchen maid.
But, of course, the slipper fitted perfectly.
"It's you!" cried the prince. "You're the one!"
"Yes," said Mossycoat, "it is me." And from that day onwards, now that they'd found each other again, Mossycoat and the prince stayed together, with a new cook, a new young gardener, and a much friendlier kitchen maid to look after them. You might have heard a similar story to Mossycoat called Cinderella. But did you know that Mossycoat was the story on which Cinderella was based?
Mossycoat, magic I am. One touch, one peep, and you'll be asleep.
The castle in Mossycoat's story was a pretend castle. But have you ever visited a real castle? Castles were built a long time ago to protect one very important person, a lord, and to be his family home. A castle was a place from where the lord could look after the lands all around that had been given to him by the king. Castles were guarded and cared for by knights. The knights also protected the lord and his family. Castles have high walls with special steps, so that the knights and soldiers could climb right to the top, walk around and keep an eye open for anyone who may be up to no good. Castles usually have several very thick doors, so the knights could control who came in and who went out.
I'm going to use this one.
Inside the walls, where the lord and the knights had their houses, was a well. A deep hole in the ground filled with fresh water from an underground spring. This is the well at Carisbrooke Castle, and the donkey and his handler are showing how the well used to work. The people who lived in the castle could draw up fresh water whenever they needed it, without having to go beyond the walls. There are castles like this which you can visit all over England.
And now for another group of children who visited a castle. They went to Dover Castle. Dover Castle stands high on the cliffs close by the sea, right in the south of England. It's a huge castle with very big buildings and very thick walls, and lots of people go to visit it each year to find out about what happened there in the past. Our group came from St. Peter's School in Canterbury, and when they got to Dover, they worked with a poet called Sandra Stevens, who helped them write their own poems about the castle.
We're class 4 from St. Peter's School, Canterbury. We went to Dover Castle for our poetry and plays project, and this is the story of our day. In Dover, there were 3 hills and 80 steps to climb.
When you get to the castle, there's an old lighthouse, some underground tunnels, and the castle itself. First, we took the letters of castle.
C, A, S, T, L,
E.
Castle.
Then we wrote next to each of the letters. Cannons looking over the channel, a bird nesting in the lighthouse, standing high looking down to the town, trebuchet standing proud, lighthouse slowly falling down, everlasting castle.
Then we went to different places in the castle to write some more poems.
We wrote about the lighthouse.
I wrote this. Don't stand on me. Why are you climbing up my insides? I am a lighthouse. Who are you shouting at?
I wrote this. I'm seeing all over, I can see all Dover. Please don't disturb me in my destiny.
Went to see the underground tunnels.
Here's my poem. The tunnels are deep and damp. It's very cold. There's a hole in the roof. It's dark, dingy and damp.
And here's mine. The tunnels smell mossy, walls are feeling rubbery. When I run down, it's like skiing. Bilbo Baggins is how I feel, in these goblin mountains. Also very, very, very cold. Some tunnels smell like mints. The floors are bumpy with flintstone.
Then we went into the castle itself and we saw Henry VIII's royal bed.
Henry's bed is very beautiful. It is very colourful. It is like a rainbow. It has the colours and the rain as curtains.
I imagine what it felt like to be the king in his very special bed. The bed shows that he is very important. The bed has red curtains and royal bedposts. I feel very important in my special bed. The servants come to serve breakfast and puff up my cushions. I feel very important in my special bed.
I imagined Henry VIII sitting on the king's throne, a big red chair, a round gold lion, rounded seat, a chair for an important man, a big round man, don't step on the carpet.
How long will there be a castle at Dover?
Castle big, castle dark. Another piece of the old puzzle, sat on top of an old hill. Till it rots, it'll stay on top of that old hill. Laid on that old hill. Easy access for us.
We hope you enjoyed our poems. We are class 4 from St. Peter's
Can you keep a secret? Well, in that case, listen to this.
The big secret.
One cold night, about 400 years ago, a group of men were carrying large barrels through an archway leading down to a dark cellar. The men were dressed in black and had their hats pulled over their heads so no one could see their faces. The barrels were heavy, and one of the men struggled, nearly dropping one of them. "Be careful," whispered his companion. "Don't you know this is dangerous? We could all be killed." After listening for a few minutes to make sure no one had heard them, the men carried on with their work. Soon all the barrels were stored in the cellar, and the men went into hiding. What could be in those mysterious barrels? Where was this cellar? What was the big secret? James I was the King of England at the time, and there was a big argument between the king and some of the people in his country. These men carrying barrels into the cellar were so angry that they had planned to blow up the king and all his advisors and his parliament right in the middle of London. There were 12 of the plotters, and they had rented the cellar right underneath Parliament and filled it with barrels of gunpowder. Their plan was to wait until a special day when the king and all his supporters would be in Parliament for its opening. It was a daring plan, but they thought it would work. They had been planning it for ages. You might have heard of one of the leaders. His name was Guy Fawkes. As the day came closer, the men in hiding were getting anxious. They needed more money to pay for their hiding place, so they decided to tell some rich people about their plot. Now this was a very big mistake. One of these rich people knew that some of his family would be in Parliament for its opening, and he didn't want to have them blown up. He thought and thought, what should he do? Should he give away the plans and save his family? How could he do this secretly? What would you have done? In the end, he decided to send a letter to one of his relatives who would also be at the opening of Parliament, warning him to stay away. He didn't say who had written the letter, but he just hoped that his relative would put two and two together and warn the king. And that's just what happened. The king's guards raced to the cellar, found the gunpowder, and they also found Guy Fawkes caught red-handed with matches and a fuse hidden in his clothing, ready to set off the explosion. The plotters were all caught, and on the 5th of November 1605, all the people who supported the king celebrated his narrow escape, lighting bonfires in the streets. Someone made a straw figure of Guy Fawkes. "Let's burn the figure on the fire," shouted the crowd. And to this day, many people still burn a guy on the bonfire and set off the fireworks in memory of the king's escape from being blown up nearly 400 years ago. Remember, remember, the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. I wonder if it was spooky in those dark tunnels. I don't mind being underground, but I prefer fresh air. Hey, how about a trip on a boat? Do you know that long before we made fast roads for trucks, cars and coaches, people dug roads for boats, water-filled roads that went all across England. They were called canals. Special boats went up and down the canals carrying all sorts of things from town to town. But water can't go uphill, and England is a very hilly place. So how do canal boats go uphill? Kirsty and Kate went to find out. What they found was a lock. First, you have to steer the boat into the lock, Then you close the gate behind you. Slowly the lock fills with water, which raises the boat. Once the lock is full and the boat has risen to the next level, you open the gate ahead of you and off you go. Locks. How to climb hills if you're in a boat.
I'm a fly, I'm a flea, that's me, oh my, oh me, I'm a flea, flea, flea. I'm a fly, I'm a flea, that's me, oh my, oh me, I'm a flea, flea, flea. I'm not really a flea, I'm a dog, but I might have fleas.
And talking of fleas, have you ever heard this rhyming song? Ring a rosies, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. You have heard of it? Ah, right. Well, Ring a Roses is a singing game nowadays, but a long time ago, it meant something very serious indeed. A very, very long time ago, there was a horrible illness in England called the plague. It was carried by little fleas that lived in the fur of rats. The fleas jumped from the rats onto the people and bit them, and after a few days, some little spots appeared in a circle. They looked, well, just like a tiny ring of pink roses. The people didn't know it was the fleas and the rats that made them ill. They thought that they caught the plague by touching someone else who had it, or by breathing in bad air. So they went around making sure that they didn't accidentally bump into anyone, and they carried posies of flowers which they held near their noses to sweeten the air that they breathed. But if they began to sneeze, a tissue, then they knew that they had caught the plague, and after about, 5 days, they fell down dead. There you go. Ring a rosies, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. Don't worry, I'm all right. Ooh.
I'm a fly, I'm a flea, that's me, oh my, oh me, I'm a flea, flea, flea.
Oh, Brosworth, no one believes that you're a flea. Oh, look at him. Anyway, now then, have you ever wanted to go back in time to see what it was like to live a long time ago? That's what Stefan and Alison wanted to find out. What it was like to live more than 100 years ago. What were the clothes like? What were the games like? What was it like to travel by horse and carriage? Big History Stories took Stefan and Alison to the house that Queen Victoria built on the Isle of Wight. It's called Osborne House. We call the time when Victoria was Queen Victorian England. So let's go back in time to Victorian England. This is Alison and Stefan today, wearing their school uniform. And this is Stefan and Alison dressed in clothes they might have worn about 100 years ago. Dressed as Victorians. Completely different. No cars to travel in today. So first a ride in a horse and carriage. This is how most people got from place to place before there were cars.
The good things is if it's hot, there's no roofs worth it. And the bad bits is if it's really cold, you can't put a roof on it. And I'll probably go in the car because it'll get you there quicker. It was a bit scary at the beginning because you went to the side where it went so fast at the beginning. It was comfortable, but a bit bumpy. If it rained, you get all wet.
No computers, no skateboards for the Victorians, but time instead for some Victorian games.
It was really hard to play and you didn't know what to do after you've done, like, once you've taken the other person's marble, you didn't know what to do after that.
Played the cup and ball. That was quite hard to play, where you had to get the skin and put it in.
2 out of 10. Yeah, because I'd rather use skateboards and computers now than not that, because it isn't exactly exciting.
And finally, a trip around the Victorian kitchen garden to see what they can find.
Probably the best thing is going around looking at the flowers and walking around Osborne House, seeing flowers I've never seen before.
I found in there chives, parsley, herbs, and lemon tree. I like the lemon tree, that's what you can get in the supermarket.
Alison and Stefan and their one-day trip back to Victorian England, complete with a real lemon tree.
Do you like playing hide and seek? If you do, here's a story about a kind of hide and seek. It's all about a prince called Charles, who later became King of England. It's a true story, but it happened long, long ago.
The oak tree escape.
There was once a prince called Charles. He was tall and handsome with black curly hair and a big moustache. He had been defeated in a big battle and had to run for his life, hiding wherever he could. He came across a big house.
Please, hide me from the soldiers, Mr. Servant.
We can't hide you here, said the servant, whose name was William Penderell. I can take you to another house, but it's a long walk and we must disguise you so that no one will know who you are. So William the servant cut off all the prince's curly hair and his moustache, and then made a lotion from walnut juice, which he spread on Charles's face, so he looked as brown and sunburned as if he'd worked outside all his life. Next, Charles took off his fine clothes and put on trousers and a shirt with holes in, so he looked more like a poorman than a prince. Then they set off. As they were preparing to cross the bridge near a mill, the miller's dog began to bark, and the miller himself came out to see who was there. "Run! Run!" gasped William Penderell. "I'll take you to my master's hunting lodge. It's deep in the forest. My mother lives there and she will hide you." The servant led Charles through the woods to the lodge which was called Boscobel. They travelled all night and got there just as morning was breaking. "The soldiers are everywhere," said the servant's mother, Dame Pendrell, "and might even search Boscobel Lodge. But there are many trees in the forest, and they can't search all of them. You must hide in the branches of one of the trees until the soldiers go." Charles set off to find a tree. He found an oak tree, not far from the lodge. He climbed up high amongst the branches and waited. Before long he could hear the voices of the soldiers and the swish-swish of their swords and long pikes as they smashed into the long grass to find out where he was hiding. "I hope I find him," shouted one, peering into a bush at the base of the oak tree. "There's a reward of £1,000, dead or alive."
Please, don't look up.
The soldiers moved off, but Charles was too terrified to move in case they returned. At last William Pendrell came to the front of the tree. "The soldiers have gone for the day, but they'll come back," he whispered.
I can't let them find me, but I can't spend another day in this tree. Oh, I'm so stiff I can hardly move.
"Come back into the lodge," said William. "There's a secret hiding place. It's very small and cramped, and the soldiers may suspect we have a secret room, but we must risk it." So he led Charles back to Boscobel Lodge. They went in through the parlour and then climbed up the back stairs to the topmost room. Once inside, William bent down and pulled back the rug, covering the wooden floor. Then he put his finger into a little hole in the floor and gently lifted up a hidden trapdoor. Underneath was a tiny box-like room, which was so small that Charles had to sit with his knees drawn up under his chin. He hardly slept, all the time listening for soldiers. When morning came, he vowed that he couldn't stay in such a small space again. Out he came, but all day he was ready to dash back into the secret place at the first sign of soldiers. The next day, William and Dame Pendrell asked some neighbours for help. They came up with a plan to get Charles out of the country. Living nearby were a family called the Lanes, who had a daughter called Jane. Jane knew that the soldiers were looking for a man with black curly hair and a moustache, but Charles was dressed in scruffy clothes and was brown as a berry. So the Lanes figured that the soldiers would never think to look closely at a lady travelling with such shabbily dressed servant. So with Prince Charles disguised as a servant, Charles and Jane Lane set off travelling to safety. Jane was in front with Charles travelling respectfully behind her, as if he were a servant.
I'm just a poor servant.
And not one soldier stopped them. Much later, when Charles became king, he remembered his day in the oak tree at Boscobel and told everybody.
I gave the Pendrells a huge reward.
I bet they got lots and lots of money as a reward, those Pendrells. After all, Charles was the king, and he was very, very rich.
All the same, though, I don't think I'd like to spend all day hiding in a tree and then all night hiding in a tiny box from under the floor. Ugh, very uncomfortable. All right, Brosworth, your turn.
I'm a worm, I'm a worm, I'm a worm, worm, worm. Put me on the ground and off I squirm. I'm a worm, I'm a worm, I'm a worm, worm, worm. Put me on the ground and off I squirm. I'm not really a worm or a flea. I'm a dog. Woof, woof. Woof, woof, woof. I'm rough and tough. Woof, woof, woof. I'm a dog. Woof,
Well,
woof.
Brosworth might not look like a flea or a worm, but there was a famous English scientist called Charles Darwin, who spent most of his life studying worms and other tiny animals, birds and insects, the creatures that are all around us. He wanted to see if he could find out their habits and discover how they adapted to the English landscape. Charles Darwin and his family lived at a place called Down House about 100 years ago. You can still visit Down House today and see the rooms and the equipment which Charles Darwin used for his experiments. Darwin's children helped their dad with his research. They even tried playing musical instruments to worms to test if worms could hear sound. I don't think they can. And the children also used to sprinkle white flour on individual bees so that they could follow where they went around the garden at Down House. Charles Darwin made all sorts of discoveries that have helped us to understand the natural world we live in. In fact, I wouldn't mind being a scientist like Charles Darwin myself. Oh, by the way, how do you know which end of a worm is its head? Tickle its middle and see which end smiles.
I'm a worm, I'm a worm, I'm a worm, worm, worm. Put me on the ground and off I squirm. I'm a worm, I'm a worm, I'm a worm, worm, worm. Put me on the ground and off I squirm.
When the summer holidays come and you can spend lots of time out of doors, what I really like doing is having a picnic. But what about this for a picnic with a difference? These people are called historical reenactors. They've dressed up in clothes like you and I might have worn hundreds of years ago, and they've all got together to show what they found out about life in the past. Let's find out what's going on.
This group is dressed as Roman soldiers. The Romans came to England from Italy a long time ago, long before we had planes, trains and electric lights, and when you could only get from place to place on foot, by horse or in a wooden boat. The Roman army had metal helmets, swords and shields just like this. And the reenactors are practicing marching in an army just like the real Romans did all that time ago. They've even got a big wooden catapult that can throw things ever such a long way. This group are pretending to be Normans and Saxons. Normans and Saxons were in England about 1,000 years ago. These pretend Normans and Saxons have even got horses just like the ones people would have used at the time. Let's watch them for a while.
Come on, John, go there. What a fool! Always stand in a corner.
You know, I wouldn't mind having a go at that. Which historical costume did you like best? I like the Norman Knights best. They come from France and their leader was called William the Conqueror. Did you know there was a famous battle in England nearly 1,000 years ago between the Normans and the Saxons? It was called the Battle of Hastings. We haven't got any pictures of the battle that were painted at the time for you to see, but there is a tapestry. That's a sort of picture with all the soldiers, horses and houses made up of brightly coloured threads and sewn into cloth. The tapestry picture is called the Bayeux Tapestry, and it's nearly 1,000 years old. It was made soon after the Battle of Hastings. You can still see it in a town called Bayeux, and that's in France. Can you imagine what it must have been like to be a Norman or Saxon soldier at the Battle of Hastings all that time ago? Here's people today pretending to be Saxon and Norman soldiers fighting each other at the Battle of Hastings. Looks pretty scary to me. What do you think?
Oh, my favourite costume is Tudor costumes. Oh, I love them. Those are things that people wore about 500 years ago. Do you know that one of the Tudor kings of England, Henry VIII, made a visit to Dover Castle? Do you remember the poems that those children from St Peter's School wrote about Dover Castle?
Henry's bed is very beautiful. It is very colourful. It's like a rainbow. It has all the colours. And rain as curtains.
A big red chair. A round gold lion. Rounded seat. A chair for an important man. A big round man. Keep off the carpet.
My bed has lovely red curtains and royal bedposts. I'm Henry and I feel very important in my royal bed. My servants bring me breakfast and puff my cushions up. I feel very important in my royal bed. But do you know that when Henry VIII stayed at Dover Castle, he took 800 people with him to look after him and be part of his court? And then there was all their horses and carriages and luggage.
And do you know that it took Henry VIII and the 800 people travelling with him with all of their horses, carriages and luggage 6 days to get from London to the castle at Dover? Nowadays, it only takes us a couple of hours to travel from London to Dover by car or train. Oof, how times have changed.
Lazy Jack.
This is the story of Lazy Jack. If Henry VIII was a very rich man, then Lazy Jack was a very poor man. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a boy called Jack who lived with his mother in the middle of the countryside. They were very, very poor. The only way that they could earn money was by Jack's mother doing some spinning to make woolen thread. But Jack was so lazy that he would do nothing but sit by the fire in the winter and laze in the warm sun each summer. Everyone had called him Lazy Jack. His mother couldn't get him to do any work for her at all. So one Monday morning, she told him that if he didn't do something to earn a living before the end of the week, she'd turn him out of her house and send him off to find his own place to eat and sleep. Now, Jack was worried at the thought of having nowhere to live, and besides, he'd miss his mother if he couldn't live with her anymore. So the next day, on a Tuesday, he went to see a local farmer and offered to work for him for the day in return for 1 penny of pay. Sure enough, Lazy Jack worked hard all day. But because he'd never worked in all of his life, he didn't know what to do with the money that he'd just earned. He held it in his hand and walked all the way home. But when he came to the bridge over the stream, he needed 2 hands to steady himself. He forgot about the money and dropped it, splash, into the stream. Well, that was very stupid, said his mother when Jack got home. You should have put the penny in your pocket. Then you wouldn't have dropped it into the stream. Oh, I will another time, said Jack. And the next day, on a Wednesday, he went out again and found a day's work with a cowkeeper. At the end of the day, the cowkeeper gave Jack a jar of milk for the work that he'd done. Now, remembering his mother's words, Jack crammed the jar of milk into the large pocket of his jacket. And, of course, as he walked home, all the milk spilt. So that when Jack got back to his mother's, there was no milk left in the jar at all. Dear me, said Jack's mother. You should have carried it on your head. Oh, I will another time, said Jack. So the next day, a Thursday, he went to work for a cheesemaker. And at the end of that day, the cheesemaker gave him a lovely cream cheese for all the work he'd done. Jack, you can see what's happening now, popped the cream cheese onto his head, just like his mother had said, and set off walking home. But by the time he got home, half the cheese had melted and run away, and the other half was stuck into Jack's hair. He looked a right mess. You great big lumpkin, said Jack's mother. You should have carried it carefully in your hands. Oh, I will another time, said Jack. On the Friday, Jack went out again and hired himself to a baker. And at the end of that day, the baker gave Jack one of the tomcats that kept the mice away from the bakery for his day's work. Remembering what his mother had said, Jack very carefully carried the tomcat in his hands. But the cat wriggled and squiggled and scratched and meowed and finally slipped out of Jack's hands and ran away. Oh, you ninny hammer, said his mum when he got home. You should have tied it with string and dragged it home after you. Oh, I will another time, said Jack. The next day, Saturday, Jack went to work for the butcher. At the end of the day, the butcher gave Lazy Jack 2 fresh chickens, all ready for the oven. So Jack tied a piece of string around the chickens and dragged them all the way home. When he got home and Jack's mother saw that the chickens she'd hoped would be their supper were completely ruined, she lost her patience. Oh, you ninny hammer! Mama, she cried, you should have carried the chickens home on your shoulders. Oh, I will another time, said Jack. The next day was Sunday and Jack rested all day. But on Monday, Jack went to work for another cattle keeper. All day long, Jack worked, and at the end of the day, the cattle keeper gave Jack a donkey to take home with him. Now, remembering what his mother had said, Jack carefully picked up the donkey, slung it onto his shoulders, and set off walking home. Now, it just so happened that on Lazy Jack's way home, there lived a very rich family who had just one daughter. But the daughter had never spoken in all of her life, and she was very, very sad. The doctor said she would never speak until someone made her laugh. The family said that if any young man ever made their daughter laugh, then that man could come and share their house and all their money and be a part of the family. The sad girl, who had never spoken and never laughed, was looking out of the window of her house, just like so, as Jack passed, carefully holding the donkey onto his shoulders, with its legs sticking up into the air. The sight of this was so comical and so strange that she burst out laughing. She burst out laughing, she did, as she rushed to tell the rest of her family what she had just seen. The family was so amazed when they heard her speak again, and immediately kept their promise by inviting Jack into their house. Soon Jack and his mother were living in their very own special part of the rich family's house, and Jack had become a wealthy gentleman with clothes and lands and horses and carriages which were nearly equal to the King of England. So there you have it, you see. Strange things do happen, even to people like Lazy Jack.
We're getting towards the end of our Big History Stories programme now. But just before we go, it's time to play Guess the Story. We're going to show you some pictures and you have to guess what they are. You can play as we go along. Hold tight and off we go with Guess the Picture.
Okay, question 1. What's the name of this special sort of picture of the Battle of Hastings? Is it the Bayeux painting or the Bayeux tapestry? It is the Bayeux tapestry.
Number 2. What's the name of this King of England? Is it Henry VIII or Charles I? It's Henry VIII.
Number 3. In our story, what did King Alfred do? Did he burn his fingers? Or did he burn some cakes? He burned some cakes!
What's the name of this famous place? Is it Boscobel Lodge or Dover Castle? It's Dover Castle. And what's the name of this house? Is it Boscobel House or Osborne House? It's Boscobel House, and this is Osborne House.
And I'm not any sort of house. I'm a fly, I'm a flea, that's me. Oh my, oh me, I'm a flea.
Frosworth, you're not a flea, you're a dog.
Yes, I am.
And I'm Prince Charles.
Last few questions, here we go. Near Boscobel House, what kind of tree did Prince Charles hide in? Was it an apple tree or an oak tree? It was an oak tree.
And I hid in it.
In the Great Plague a long time ago, could you catch the plague from fleas or from touching someone? You could catch it from fleas! Ring a roses, a pocket full of posies, a tissue, we all fall down. Whoop.
Last question. Which was your favourite story? Well, we can't give you the answer to that question. Only you know which was your favourite story.
That's right, but we hope you enjoyed watching and listening to Big History Stories. We'll see you again soon, but for now, it's goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. I'm a fly, I'm a flea, that's me. Oh my, oh me, I'm a flea.
Goodbye.
Bye.
spin some wool and bake some cakes for her tea. Yes, she said, you can sit by my nice warm fire if you like, but you can jolly well make yourself useful by watching my cakes and seeing that they don't burn. They're cooking beside the fire. Yep, you make sure that they don't burn while I go out and feed the pig. Whee! Said the pig. Be quiet, said the old lady. Anyway, now because he was king and had lots of servants to look after him, Alfred never ever baked a cake or cooked a meal in his entire life, but he agreed to watch the cakes while the old lady went out to feed the pig. Soon he forgot about the cakes cooking by the fire and began to think about the Vikings instead. I suppose I could get an army and fight them, he thought to himself, but then what if they beat us and take away all our land? Oh dear, I don't know. Well, what if I pay them to stay away? Or maybe I could tell them that they can keep the houses and land that they've already stolen as long as they don't take any more. Round and round the thoughts went in his head. Hotter and hotter the cakes beside the fire got. And just then, King Alfred smelt a funny smell. Sniff, sniff, sniff. What's that smell? Oh no! It's the cakes, they're burning! What am I going to do? Just at that moment, the old woman came back from feeding the pigs. She was tired and hungry, and all she was really looking forward to was eating one of her freshly made cakes. But when she got near the house, no one was ever rude to him or ever answered back. Alfred was a king at a time when the Vikings came to England in big boats from countries like Denmark and Sweden and tried to live here themselves. Some Vikings came and stole as many valuable things as they could from rich houses and churches. King Alfred had a very hard time dealing with these Vikings, and he hated it when the messengers ran into him saying, "The Vikings are here again!" One day, when the messengers had come in yet again to tell King Alfred that a very big group of Vikings had just landed, King Alfred decided that he just about had enough of this, and he needed to get away and think about what to do with these Vikings. So off he went on his own, walking far away from the Vikings and his troubles. He walked and walked until he came to a village a long way away from anywhere. When the villagers saw their king walking through the village, all the women curtsied and all the men bowed. After all, he was King Alfred. But when he got to the last house in the village, he was very, very tired. He asked the old woman who lived in the last house if he could sit down. The old woman didn't recognize him and didn't know he was King Alfred. She just thought he was another man walking about doing nothing and looking for a nice warm fire to sit down and be lazy by. The old woman was cross because, unlike the man, she had lots to do. She had to milk the cow, look after the field. King Alfred the Great!
You may be a king, but when it's your turn, don't let the cakes burn. Oh, when it's your turn, don't let the cakes burn.
Most of us don't bake our cakes over a fire any longer. We've got gas and electric cookers and microwave ovens to bake our cakes, do our cooking. People who do cooking as their job are called chefs. Chefs wear special clothes and cook on very big cookers. But in the past, before electricity and gas, chefs had to build a real fire if they wanted to cook a meal. And they didn't have any fridges or freezers to keep food fresh.
It's really nice, but it's not too salt, is it?
Here's some people wearing clothes like people wore a long time ago. They're also trying out being chefs who cooked with a real fire.
You might get some food from to get on with it.
Big history. Big history.
Hello, and you're watching Big History Stories.
In a moment, we're going to tell you some really good stories, all about things that happened a long, long time ago. Perhaps you know some of them already.
Well as the stories, there are lots of other things in our programme. We'll be going for a ride on some special boats, climbing right to the top of a very old building, a castle, hearing about some famous people, and meeting some children who went on an adventure into the past.
Woof, woof. And you'll be meeting me, Brodsworth. I'm a fly, I'm a flea that's me. I'm a flea, that's me.
Later, Brodsworth. You're in the programme later. Now then, get ready, hold tight, and off we go with our big history stories.
Do you like eating cakes? Hey, I do, especially chocolate cake. Oh, that's my favourite. Well, this is a story all about a king called King Alfred and some cakes.
King Alfred and the Cakes.
King Alfred lived so long ago that there were hardly any houses or buildings left from the time when he was alive. King Alfred was one of the first kings of England. He made new laws to help people, and everybody looked up to him. And because he was king, she too sniffed the burning smell and realised that Alfred had let her cakes go up in smoke. As soon as she got in through the door, she picked up a broom and began to beat King Alfred all around the room. Why, you good-for-nothing, useless man! Can't you be left alone for 2 minutes to look after my cake? She shouted. But, you don't know who I am, spluttered Alfred. Oh, yes, I know who you are, all right. I know you're just another useless whack, idle whack, windbag whack. But who can't whack be trusted to look after whack my cakes? But I'm King Alfred. King Alfred, my foot. Never mind being king. Never mind kingdoms. What about my cakes? What am I going to have for my tea? And you know, that was the only time that anyone had ever dared to chase King Alfred with a broom. Pretty soon, the woman found out he really was king. Just imagine that, chasing the King of England around with a broom and whacking him. But Alfred didn't punish her, no, because he believed in doing the right thing and in being fair. Besides, as he said himself, it's true, it was my fault, and I was a silly, useless man to just sit there and let her cakes burn. Good story, that, isn't it? Oh, by the way, do you know which king is purple and burns cakes? King Alfred the Grape, get it?